My name is Tiffani Bova. I'm the Growth and Innovation Evangelist at Salesforce. And thank you so much for spending time with me. We were talking sort of in the green room before that it's sort of, we're a little bit on video fatigue. So I appreciate your willingness to spend this 45 minutes or hour with us here today to talk about this experience equation. I'm going to give you a little history. In my keynotes when I was on stage, I've been here now at Salesforce for about 5 years. I was saying this over and over, that I didn't think it was a coincidence that Salesforce was one of the best places to work in the world, according to many, many lists, or one of the most innovative companies in the world, again, according to many lists, and we're the fastest growing enterprise software company. And I didn't think that was a coincidence. I actually thought that there was a correlation between those things. Happy employees and happy customers drive greater innovation, which if those things are in place, you get faster growth rates. So I went to our previous CMO, Tiffani Bova, and I asked her, would she be willing to let me test out this hypothesis? And she said yes. So we went down the road and did some research with Forbes Insight, and it came back with some amazing insights and findings, which I'm going to share with you here today. But it's also sort of been a catalyst for us to continue the research. So we're in the middle of now a global view of this very same set of questions. The one I'm going to share with you now is just US based, but I have now shared it across the globe, probably 40 or 50 times across ASEAN, ANZ, EMEA, LATAM, and the US. And pretty consistently, we've heard very similar things, that people are finding the power between these two things, but also some of the things I'm going to share with you around the opportunities and challenges that people are facing. So I look forward to the questions after. Please start posting them in the chat. We'll get to them at the end. But without further ado, let me dig right in. So I always start here, and this is really an opportunity for me to set the stage, that in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, and in the expert's mind, there are few. So many of us go, look, it's not the way we do it here. We tried it and it failed. The status quo is very comfortable. And if you're growing, it's even harder to reimagine what could be possible. It's even harder to have this beginner's mind and to be willing to sort of self-disrupt. I know this week later, you're going to have Whitney Johnson. She's fantastic on sort of navigating the S-curve and disrupting yourself personally before you can even potentially consider disrupting your business. So there's so much there to be said for having this beginner's mind, because ultimately, if you don't give yourself the space to consider new ways of doing things, you will continuously lean back and fall back to the status quo. And for leaders around the globe, look, as individual contributors as well, obviously, we're at a crossroads. We can either go back to what we were doing before and how we were doing it, or we can take everything we've learned over the last 18 months and apply that to the future, whether it be reskilling, retraining, new business models, new products, new segments, new categories, whatever it might be. But I can tell you pretty consistently, whether it's our research or others across the consulting industry and or the academic industry, there is no question that people are at the center of all the decisions you should be making. So let's set the scene. Let's set the scene with kind of what's happening from where we were to where we are today. We have definitely moved to this digital first world. And the digital first world is really an opportunity for us to say, we might have done things in this way face to face. We may have done them, via email, via phone. We may have even done them via chat. But now the channels have exploded, right? There is much more around participating via video. How can we stay engaged and close to our customers? How do we get better at forecasting in a world now where commerce has significantly shifted from potentially brick and mortar to online? And what do we think is going to happen with that going forward? There's so many things there. Looking into the employee base and saying we might have to coach and train in real time, just in time, in order to make sure that people are using the technology and tools that are now available to them in some of these new channels I was just mentioning, as well making sure that they know how to be socially aware about their digital personality, right? In how they portray themselves, how they communicate, what things and tools they might use, et cetera. So all of this has to do with getting closer to customers and engaging more with employees. But From some research that we've done recently, we found 76% of workers want flexibility on where they work. And beneath that was also how they work, how they engage, what flexible work might look like, and what things they would be willing to have drive them into the future from an employment standpoint. But I can tell you that if you were 18 months ago caught flat-footed with a lack of digital investments, it was a really hard year for you, because ultimately those brands that had made investments in digital have really been able to either sustain and withstand all the things that were coming at them. Something as simple as a restaurant that didn't have their menu online or didn't have the ability to order via Uber Eats or any other delivery service. If the restaurant was like, look, 99% of our revenue and our business comes through the front door, and then all of a sudden the door is closed, and they didn't have an understanding of who their customers were, or even to understand how to contact them, how could you even message them to say, here's our menu, we've signed up for delivery here, we know you came to dinner every Thursday night with your family, we want to continue doing that for you. But if you just didn't know, you were trying with brute force to use these antiquated systems to help keep you not only up and running, but engage with your employees and your customers. And that's where this disconnection of technology has really impacted brands' ability to be responsive. And look, this isn't just because obviously I work at Salesforce. This is because customers are saying that they are noticing an extended or expanded gap between their expectations and the reality of what's being delivered. Customers expect consistent interactions across departments, yet the reality is customers feel like they're dealing with different businesses. And especially when they want tailored engagement, like, hi, dear valued customer, dear Tiffani Bova, dear Tiffani is not personalizing. But dear Tiffani, we know that you've done these 3 things with us over the last month. What can we do to help you do this 4th thing? Or tell me you know something about me, because ultimately that's what's most important. I want you to engage with me as a customer. Now, I'm spending time here because this is the basis of the experience that customers are looking for from brands. But the reality below this one on the right is that, the average enterprise has some 900 or so apps, enterprise apps. And that isn't just like apps on your phone. This is just applications in general, but only 29% of them are actually integrated, which means you've put your employees on their back foot, right? They're always in this defensive mode of, I have to go look in multiple places to find the information regarding a customer. And once again, this isn't a Salesforce message. This is you've got to get a handle on who your customers are, empower those employees to have what they need in order to serve those customers day in and day out. If it's a collaboration of multiple solutions, fine, but you have to pull that together and integrate it in a way that gives your employees everything they need to serve your customers. Otherwise, they have what was on the previous, on the left side of this, right? This disconnected experience, this you don't know who I am. And when those 2 things are out of whack, that is when growth rates are impacted. And that leads me to this experience equation, right? Ultimately, talking about both of these things simultaneously. Well, I'm not going to share the CEO name. It was a CEO of a massive software company. And I was at Gartner at the time prior to joining Salesforce. And he was sharing with me their top priorities. And I said, our number 1 priority is, and he listed 3 things. And I said, I went to a state school. But last time I checked, there's only 1 number 1. Like, you can't have 3 number 1s. It means that your employees and or your customers and your vendors and your greater shareholder community doesn't know what you're focused on. So the fastest way to get customers to love your brand is to get employees to love their job. And so if you can get your employees to love their job, they will show up with a better attitude. They will not only be better to collaborate with and better teammates, but they'll have a much better attitude when servicing customers. So I want you to think, right? An unhappy employee with an unhappy customer is a really dangerous combination. An unhappy employee with a happy customer is also not great, right? Because that unhappy employee can pull down a very happy customer. If you have a happy employee and a happy customer, that's kind of nirvana. But if you have a happy employee and an unhappy customer, that happy employee has the opportunity to turn that customer around, right? So, at its baseline, that's what this quote means, that if you can get to a place where you're really looking for customers to embrace your brand, you have to get employees absolutely full stop to love their job. Now, what does that mean? So there's very much a disconnection between these value outcomes. Like when you think about customer lifetime value, it's what's their profit over a duration of years? What's the cost to acquire them? What's the cost to serve them? What does customer success and loyalty and expansion look like? And that really leads you to this customer lifetime value. And that may or may not tell you, right, how satisfied your customers are. But if the lifetime value is increasing, the recency to buy is going up, the acquisition cost is potentially going down, the cost to serve them because you've started to automate things is also going down, ultimately you're going to have higher level of success and loyalty and expansion into that account. If you're not doing those things, you're sort of always at risk. And so then you have the flip side, right, of what we were just talking about, which is the customer side of that. Now you have to look at the employee lifetime value. And in this particular case, we're talking about sales. So if you think about a salesperson, hiring them, getting them onboarded, training them what they want to have, and then how long till they become productive, you have to make sure that you're getting them to a place of productivity much quicker. And I don't mean productivity like calling 100 people a day. I mean productivity of actually engaging with customers, adding value, and bringing revenue in the door. So you have to look through the entire lifetime value of that employee. What's the cost to hire them? What's the cost of employment? What's their growth, gross margins generated? So what's the profit? How is their customer lifetime value look against everybody else? And then the length of employment that they have. And so when we talk about EX or employee experience, we're not talking about the recruitment process. We're talking about from the moment they start day one at their new job to the day they become an alumni. It's really in that block of time of how can you help an employee be much more successful and productive in their day-to-day role. And so that's this compounding effect, right? Where you take happy employee and you take happy customer and you pull those two things together. Because if you get that customer and employee satisfaction up, you get the customer and employee lifetime value up, you get the result of retention, revenue growth, cost of acquisition requiring, cost of serve going down, right? Revenue per customer going up, all kinds of goodness. But ultimately, you just have a happier employee base, and it reflects within your culture. If you're a great place to work, if you have really great retention rates of your employees, you have lots of people who want to work there, that's a really good thing, right? And it's the same thing with customers. How can you get them to really embrace what it is you're doing from an employee standpoint and from a product standpoint? Now, what did the research show? Here are sort of the 5 big stats that I found really resonated most with customers. And that is, or organizations, I should say. So 76% of revenue growth leaders rank EX as a top priority in the next 3 years, but only 29% of the laggards do. And so when you hear a lot of companies over pivot, like we are a product-led company, customers are number one, right? We're customer first. Sometimes that can be, expected around at the expense of everything else, right? That it's customer first and doesn't matter what else happens, but we always put the customer first. And that isn't what we're saying here. 89% of revenue growth leaders say that improved EX leads directly to improved CX. So if you can pull the employee satisfaction into the decisions you make around how you're trying to improve customer experience. Look, I was part of the team at Gartner that made the prediction that the chief marketing officer would spend more than the chief information officer by sort of 2015, 16-ish. And we were pretty close to nailing that. The other side of it was we said that customer experience was going to be the new battleground. And that absolutely came true. But I think what I missed in that work was the employee side of this and how that plays such a critical role in it. Now, the money slide, right, and the money stat is this one in the middle, 1.8x faster revenue growth at companies with high CX and EX versus low CX and EX. For a $1 billion brand, that's a $40 million impact. If you're a smaller company, you just have to sort of do the math on that. But ultimately, there is value from a revenue standpoint when you get these two things right. If you could get 1.4x, whatever your current growth rate is, by connecting these two things. And by the way, it's not easy, but if you know that you've got something to shoot for, and then you've got some ability to know, did we hit it or not hit it? Were we able to see that lift in revenue? The next one is 51% of executives say that fast growth, revenue growth does not automatically lift EX. And so just because you're growing fast, it can be just from that brute force that I was talking about a few slides ago. It doesn't mean that your employees are necessarily collectively happy. And so fast growth does not equal those two things. It could be a completely frictionless, easy buying experience, and the product is a product that has high demand, regardless of how you might treat those customers. So ultimately, you want to make sure that you're looking at it from both sides. And then the number one organizational challenge, and this is one that I've validated on a global basis, not just at the US region, is that many execs say that they focus on one, CX or EX, but not both. So, many executives will say, we are so focused on customer experience. We're a customer-led company. All of our decisions, that's our true north, like that's what we do. Or they'll say, we're absolutely all about the employee, like that's what we care most about. And then they get the lift from the customer side, but they're not looking at them with the same level of intensity. And that's really the opportunity to pull those two things together. Now, I know that this slide may be a little small for you to read, but I'll give you a link at the end on where you can download the research. But I wanted to show you that we actually looked at across these quadrants of high CX and low EX gave a 4.77 compounded annual growth rate. If you were low and low in both of them, it was 4.35. If you were low CX and high EX, you got 7.2. And then if you were in that leaders, right, of those two, that's that 1.8x, right, of 8.5% compounded annual growth rate. Now, not all companies are on this list in the right quadrant. Not everybody was part of the study. It was a very specific group based on the research we could pull from to sort of come up with what the story is. And you may also notice if you look on there, Salesforce isn't even on there, right? This is not about us. This is about the research. This is about how we can actually find ways in which companies can lean into this concept and find growth. Now, sounds easy on a slide. 1.8x sounds like a home run if you're in sales or marketing or customer service or you're an executive. But we want to make sure you understand what's preventing companies from taking this action. The very first one is this lack of alignment. And the example I give here is if you have a chief marketing officer or someone who's responsible for customer experience, and then you have somebody who's responsible for the human capital you have, right? It could be HR. You have those two groups, the CMO or marketing or chief customer officer, whatever you might call them, focused on customer experience. How often do they connect? How often do they connect? And how often do you pull IT into that conversation? Because remember that stat, 900 enterprise apps, there's no shortage of things employees have to engage with, but only 29% of them are actually integrated, which means the employee is not having a great experience. So if HR or your human resources team actually can come in and go, look, we're having, a lot of feedback from employees that they're feeling like they're not getting the support from a tools perspective. How does that make it back to IT? And they're going, look, we're just deploying what people are asking us to deploy. Nobody's telling us what we need to integrate and how employees are actually using it. So pulling those groups together and that lack of alignment between the business unit leaders, your human resources team, and your IT organization. Now, as you get smaller, sometimes that is the same person, or sometimes it's a team of 3 and 4. So I understand that I say this from an enterprise point of view, but if you have individuals who spend a portion of their time on those topics, I'm talking about getting everybody together to come up with what's the common goal of delivering a compelling and meaningful employee experience. What do customers demand from you, and how can you bridge the gap between those two? The other thing we heard was enhancing both EX and CX, even in times of revenue growth, right? To prevent this burnout. We've all been stuck at home for the most part on Zoom calls, and we were surveying our employees every single month, and we actually saw a spike in burnout sort of this time last year. And our executive team absolutely made a hard pivot to say, hold on, how do we start to change this so that we can get people some time back. So we changed meetings from 30-minute blocks on the calendar to it, and automatically was 20 minutes and automatically was 50 minutes. Never do sort of 3 video calls in a row. Give yourself 2 breaks a day. Wellness Wednesdays, take, one Friday a month off, no meetings Thursdays, really trying to drive a behavior change to pull back on the fact that everyone was working much, much harder. And even though people were saying they were more productive, they weren't taking, those sort of natural breaks you might take when you were in the office, right? Go out to lunch, walk and get something to drink, go walk and talk to somebody at their desk and take just that break of staring at the screen all day. The other is isolated teams. 40% of executives said that creating teams that combine EX and CX skills is the best way to succeed. So do you have a working group that is sort of, responsible for this experience equation within your own organization? So whether it's 5 to 7 people, 3 to 5 people, whatever the right number is for you, getting everybody on a table and meeting, either virtually or in person, meeting on a regular basis, monthly, and reviewing. Are we having high turnover? Are job applicants declining? Are product roadmaps being delayed? Are projects failing at a higher rate than they normally do? Are we seeing more sick days? Are we seeing something in the employee base that we need to pay attention to? From an IT perspective, are we working through the projects that will help ease some of the pain that's happening on the employee side and the customer side? What are our customers saying? Like, what is the voice of our customers? How is that survey going? What's feedback from the field or even from a feedback loop that you've put in place? Pulling that together so that you don't have these unintended consequences of people being isolated in teams and not bridging it. Now, I often hear, we want to break down silos, like it's because of this silo organization we have. I'm here to tell you, I'm not a fan of breaking down silos because I think there's power in making sure that you have very strong guardrails around what people are supposed to do every day. But what I want to add is bridges between those silos so that people can collaborate in a very easy way. So I can just reach across the aisle, collaborate with someone while I'm still in my silo, right? And then come back over when I need to get back to what I need to do. So these isolated teams is an area where you can make impact pretty quickly if you're willing to start to look at the organization in ways you can actually support your employees. So what are the next steps? If you sort of are intrigued by the concept, right? Like we are hyper-focused on customer experience, we're hyper-focused on employee experience, but I hadn't thought about pulling that together. We don't have a working team. I don't even know, what our customer satisfaction is or what our employee satisfaction is. What can we do? So the first thing I'd say is align your company with strong leadership and vision. How do you approach employee satisfaction? Are your leaders connected and open and transparent? Is there a high level of trust and communication? All of those things have to start from the top. And so whatever that vision is, whatever those values are, whatever that leadership style is, you have to get much more regular and also be open to feedback from your employees and customers. The second, as I've said a number of times, is this align IT and operational strategy to focus in on CX and then incentivize this cross-functional team, right? Those bridges between the silos, IT, CMO or Chief Customer Officer, and your Chief Human Resources Officer or HR, or even training, right? Pulling everybody together in order to understand what the current situation is and how you can actually improve it. And then the last is invest in technologies to measure it. It's often said, right? You can't manage what you can't measure. And it's not that you have to measure everything, like every second, every minute of every day, of every week, of every month, of every quarter, of every year. But I do want you to start to understand what are the key 2 or 3 metrics that pull EX and CX together and create a regular cadence to say, where are we today? Is that the right number? How can we start to turn the dial and make improvements so we can start to see an increase in employee satisfaction, customer experience, right? To get that sort of multiplier effect of the power of those 2 things, right? Looking across employee lifetime, customer lifetime, and how do we really accelerate that? So, in the future for me, customer-driven organizations will completely reset value and meaningful engagement with employees and customers, not just employees and not just customers. We need both. So My question for you is, what will you do differently? What will you do differently based on what you heard here today and what you've heard across this entire session over the last couple of weeks? We can all make more money, but we cannot make more time. So if you've invested the time to come and listen to some new thinking, what are you taking away from that? What little pivots and changes can you make every single day? Even something as simple as change the day of your team meetings, like something that simple starts to get people much more comfortable with change because it's uncomfortable, right? If you're really comfortable in your day-to-day, you're not stretching yourself enough to do things that might be a little risky. You have to get much more comfortable with that. You have to get comfortable with failure. You almost have to sort of fall in love with failure if you're going to try some of these new things, because not everything will go as planned. But whatever you choose to do, be bold. Be bold in your decisions. I joke that unless you're a surgeon and you're going to kill somebody or it's illegal, don't do it. But besides that, be bold. Give it a shot, right? The worst thing that can happen is you learn something new. Try it again, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and keep going. And if you're a manager, reward that kind of behavior from your people. Because once again, this is about, I feel safe in making, failing at something and trying it. And then I can learn and try it again the next time. And maybe I get it right the second time or the third time or the fourth time. But if my management, my team is sort of supporting that journey, all the better. So as I mentioned, you can get a hold of the research. It's called the Experience Equation. The link is below, but if you just search Experience Equation, Salesforce and Forbes, it'll pop up if you don't have something to write that down with. You can follow me on my podcast called What's Next with Tiffani Bova. I do a lot of LinkedIn Lives as well, pushing out a lot of great content on conversations just like this one with many of the people actually that spoke at the event over the last few weeks. And then I have my book, Growth IQ, which has become a Wall Street Journal bestseller. It's translated in 9 languages. She's coming up on her 3rd birthday. So still going strong. And I often get asked, what I would change, if anything, in Growth IQ after the last 18 months. And the thing I will tell you is that I missed the employee in that book, not completely, but I didn't use it as a growth lever. And so the next book will pick up sort of where Growth IQ left off and really talk about this experience equation. So with that, I say thank you for spending some time with me. I'm going to end the show from a slide perspective, and I think we are going to go to some Q&A. So yes. I will pass it back over to you, Samantha.
Thank you, Tiffani, and thank you for the talk. And I completely agree. And sometimes with everything that you presented, and sometimes I personally have moments of, it seems so simple. How do we not get this? It's all about people. And as the former head of marketing for Starbucks, very people oriented organization, what you've presented really resonated. But I have a question for you on that. And what I would like to invite everybody to do is, if you do have a question, please either post them in the chat or you can raise your hand. And it looks like Mark's got his hand raised. So awesome. We'll have a question for Mark. But one question I did have for you is, it does seem simple and it is all about people. But when you look at that CX and the EX and that top quadrant, what is it that companies are doing that are in that top quadrant that other companies aren't doing? Is there any traits or processes that they have that you see as common elements that people should be thinking about?
Yeah, they have that mentality of we're focused on EX and CX. We have connections between those teams. We understand our employee lifetime, right? Their lifetime value, and how we can make that experience better. And it's aligned on the customer side. And so if you take someone like Starbucks as an example, right? Okay, we're going to train people. We're going to give the ability for them to earn college degrees because they work here. We're going to be one of the first that's going to offer healthcare. We're going to pay a competitive salary. And even though we're a coffee brand, right? Or a coffee location. And the prior CEO literally said, if you don't agree with us being much more sort of socially and, service minded, then don't invest in the stock. Right? Literally what he said. Right. So, I think ultimately there's a great example, right? Very strong connection to the employee, very strong connection to the customer, and massive growth rates, over the last 20 years. And by the way, when Starbucks had a stall, because they did, I actually covered it in the book, was because they lost their way on CX. They lost their way on customer experience. And the employee was overwhelmed by all the things that was getting thrown at them. So let's pull back on what we were doing to employees, and let's pull back on what we were doing, the confusion we were causing for customers. And even something as simple as, this is a famous story, right? But walking into to Starbucks and having it smell like food and not like coffee. Something that simple, right? And changing that had all the ability to get themselves back in line. And once those corrections started, it took about 18 months. All of a sudden, the growth rates went back. And from the moment of that decision, it was like a 400% growth rate over that period of time. So, there's a lot of power and a lot of examples from a lot of companies, whether it be, especially in the US, Southwest Airlines, Hilton Hotels, USAA, there's a lot, right? So, and we use a lot of those stories in the research as well. So hopefully that answered the question.
Great, thank you. Mark, you had a question. You've got your hand raised. Did you want to come up? There we go.
No, it wasn't necessarily a question. It was more a comment. Is on what you said. What will you do differently? I think it's about listening actively to people, and if you hear something, trying to correct it, to really work on that EX acts with the people. So certainly, keeping focus on that employee development. But I think, and maybe that brings me to a question where you said, okay, where Starbucks was doing well was they were growing like hell, so they could give a lot to their employees, like better social security and things like that. Of course, if your company is not in that growth trajectory, what Starbucks was at the moment, where it slowed down, then all this becomes also a bit more difficult, because then often companies do then is then they start cutting in some benefits, etc. What I don't think is necessarily the right thing to do. But what I want to come to is, it seems easier when you're in a growth company than when you're not. So how do you do it when you're not actually necessarily in that big growth?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mark, because I agree, right? The examples I tossed out are massive sort of Fortune 500 brands in the US. And my comment back would be, if you're listening to this and you're a very small company, a startup, you're an entrepreneur, et cetera, then the decisions you make now about how you treat your employees, how you're going to handle your customers, has long-term effect on what kind of culture you're going to create, right? And so if you start with this in mind, imagine as you get bigger and bigger and bigger, you can continue to invest and invest and invest. If you're a medium-sized brand, if you're like $2, $3, $4, $5 million in revenue, what are you making those investments in? If you're not going to invest in your people, unfortunately, they might leave. And so investing in your people to get them to actually, stay as employees and feel as if you're supporting them from a brand perspective, or from an employment and day-to-day job perspective, you're going to have a higher likelihood of keeping them and getting their best work. And so sometimes it's it may cost a little bit of money, but what's the return? So for every dollar you spend in marketing, so what's your CAC of cost of acquisition, today, but for every dollar you spend in marketing, like you earn back whatever, it might be 60 cents, 30 cents, 40 cents. For every dollar you spend, it might be $1.20, I don't know, right? But if you spend $1 on your employees, what do you get back? Right? Do you get more innovative products? Do you get projects that are done better and right the first time? Is there greater collaboration? So what does that dollar actually get you back? And so those are the conversations that if you're a CFO, a CEO, head of strategy, if you're the owner, entrepreneur, founder of a business, these are the questions you need to ask. If we're going to spend $1, what's going to give us the best return? Marketing, hiring, training, integration, applications, tools, like spending $1, if you only have $1 to spend, or 10,000 to spend, or 50,000 to spend, whatever that number is, where are you going to get the greatest return? Now, the investments in EX and CX might not show themselves in Q1 of you doing these changes. They might not show up until Q3, 4, 5, or 6. So you have to be committed to the journey. You have to be committed to the process. Otherwise, you'll pull the plug too quickly, and then you're going to have to start it again 2 or 3 quarters later, right? That you didn't hang on long enough. And so there's a great quote that I have in my book that Jeff Bezos has said and has repeated a number of times. But he used to say when he was the CEO, you know, if we had a good quarter this quarter, it's not because of decisions we made today. It's actually because of decisions we made 2 or 3 years ago. And so that's the kind of attitude you have to have, right? You have to be committed, and that is your vision, and that is your culture, and that is your company, that you're powered by happy employees and happy customers driving for that growth. So easy for me to say in 3 minutes, like, I'm not you, I'm not the leader of your company. I don't have your culture, but that's the goal. And so if you take that away, where you can sit down with your team, your leadership team, or even, those around you to say, hey, I listened to this. This is what I heard. What do you think? How do you think we're doing? What could we improve upon? And if you start asking those questions, there may be things that are low-hanging fruit, as we say here in the States, to go and grab it. And so there's a CEO of she's got a $2 billion unicorn brand. She's in Dragon's Den in Canada. And I had her on my LinkedIn Live, and I've done a bunch of stuff with her. And she actually set something up internally with her employees, kind of like a stupid email box, like stupid stuff we do email box. Just email this email box of stupid stuff we do. And really quickly, it was like 30, 40, 50 things that were like, why are we doing it that way? And they just eliminated it really quickly. And it's those little things. Submitting expense reports takes, 5 steps. Can we make it 2? Or like, trying to order something, it could be something really simple, but you don't know until you ask, and open the door for your employees and your customers to give you feedback. So I hope that helped.
Yeah, thank you. And I like your idea of the stupid ID email or whatever. Yeah, or stupid things we do email. Yes. Yeah.
It's brilliant. And can I just build off of what you said, Tiffani? Because there's been a lot of studies done. And actually, there was one last year by Stanford, which looked at organizational blueprints for success. And it was specific around, organizations that start from day one, that have a people culture or a leadership culture, and they put people first, are the ones that actually have more success in the long run. And actually, I'm just going to share what you've kind of challenged my thinking with. Is it's really interesting that from a marketing perspective, we're always looking at the return of investment, but from a human perspective or HR, we're always looking at it as a cost. So what if we were to change and reframe that model to really look at what is the return on investment of our, people as well? And I think that's a great takeaway that I know I will definitely take forward. On that, I have another question for you. You asked, what will we change because of what we heard here today? What are you changing because of what you've heard, either through the Innov8rs Conference or Unconference, and or because of things that have happened in the last year?
That's a great question. I early on, as pretty much with everybody, I landed back from Sydney in the US March 10th. So I got in right before I couldn't have gotten back. So I got back, was grounded. 2019, I flew 275,000 miles, gave 100 keynotes on 6 continents. And so it's been a very interesting, 14 or 15 months for me, as like with everybody. But when I first started speaking again, and I was talking about the Great Reset, it was all the things that we had learned early on in the first sort of 90 days. And one of them I learned was I was driving through to go to our local CVS, Rite Aid, and the parking lot was full in front of the Starbucks. And I was very confused because I knew Starbucks was closed. So when I was driving through, I realized that people were sitting in their cars with their kids, and they were sniffing the Wi-Fi off of Starbucks because they didn't have high-speed internet. Yeah. So if we're going to work from everywhere and have success from anywhere, and 30 million people in the US still don't have access to high-speed internet, you don't have access to being able to educate virtually, work virtually, you don't have the capabilities and then the access and opportunity, I thought that was unacceptable, right? And what are the things we can learn through that? And so really talking a lot about that topic, actually, with a lot of our clients who have the ability to try to shore up what happens in communities where they don't have access to all the things we all take for granted. Like we're doing this unconference. Well, okay, what if you're watching it on, dial-up, which I don't even know if there is still dial-up, but you get the point, right? Or no internet access whatsoever. And so I feel like we have to find a way to give access and opportunity more collectively if we're going to move to this more hybrid world. And I think that was a lot of where I spent my time, is what can I do and how can I have an impact and who can I talk to about some of these conversations, especially as we just very quickly say we're going to go to a hybrid world. We very quickly say everyone's going to work from home. And then what happens when childcare or elder care or, so many millions of women are out of the workforce that we lost 10 years of progress. They may not go back. So there's lots of things like that has happened, so on the, how can we make it better? We now know things, we can't unlearn them. Now that we know them, we can't unknow them. And then on the more positive side, it's been fantastic to see companies pull together to solve some of these really big problems, like creating drugs in competitive companies, drug companies very, very quickly, pulling together for PPE equipment and all the things that we did from a healthcare perspective. And, Salesforce, we rented multiple 747s and 777s and flew things around the world, including most recently to India. So really kind of pulling together as the global society and what can we do to stand up for those that may not have everything we have in the US. So, I'm not sure that's really what you were looking for from an answer, but there's no way that I can't talk about sort of the social side of the things that we've learned because, everything around just the social consciousness around equality for all, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of things that I've taken from this time, and I've tried to weave that into all the things that I do. And I think employee is one of those angles that I can have that conversation in a way that doesn't feel quite so, why am I talking about this topic, right? But if I talk about employee and I talk about how do we make it better for them, I can weave in these equality conversations.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Well, I think we've got time for one more question. Do we have time? Another question from the audience? Well, then I have a question for you.
Okay.
I'm always full of lots of questions. But if there's one thing that you hope people take away from today that they can implement as a daily practice, what would that be?
If you're a people manager, have conversation with your people. Ask them, how are you doing? And I know that we're 18 months in, you're probably already doing this, but we're also at another phase where in the US, most of it's opening back up. Now people have a different level of anxiety. Do I have to go back to work? Like, what's it going to look like? How am I going to take care of? My kids aren't in school. Daycare isn't open yet. There's a new level of anxiety. And so make sure you check in on your employees. Give them access to tools and resources. So even if it's not something you're paying for, like go find nonprofits that you can introduce into your employee base. It might be about reskilling and retraining. You can go to Trailhead, which is Salesforce's free learning management platform. You can log in and you could take trails on learning how, what's the difference between machine learning and artificial intelligence, to what's the fourth industrial revolution, to how to write a better, email, to how to be a better storyteller. So it's across the map, but investing in yourself from a training perspective. So checking in with your employees and then giving them the access from a reskill, retooling perspective, now knowing that we may be in this hybrid environment for some time forward. And then, on the customer side. So when the pandemic first hit, our CEO, Mark Benioff, it was like the May-June timeframe gave us a challenge of 1 million conversations with customers, not 1 million sales calls, not 1 million RFP responses, not 1 million demos. Now we were 57,000 employees at the time. So 1 million, you can figure out the math. We ended up hitting about 1.5 million. But those conversations uncovered what we should be focused on as a brand. We launched 6 new products. We reorganized some of our product organizations. We opened up 4,000 new recs. We made an acquisition. We've done a lot of things that were really from those million conversations. And now we're up above 6 million conversations. And now it's just become embedded in what we do. So it's how do you get closer to the customer, get closer to your employees, listen to what they're saying, making those adjustments. You can't do everything they want, but letting that communication loop really be open is what matters. So that's what I'd say there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing all of your knowledge. I can tell that you're extremely passionate about this. And it's like, I want to continue the conversation, but I realize that we're out of time.
No worries.
Tiffani, so you did mention where people can follow you if they want to. Also, I think if anybody has any questions that they didn't get a chance to answer, feel free to post them on the Innov8rs platform as well, and we'll do our best to respond to people. And thank you again for your time. And if anybody's joining tomorrow's session, Kate has been amazing and posted the link in the chat, so you can follow that and put it into your calendar for tomorrow. But thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you at another Innov8rs event soon.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. Have a great day.
Thank you.